What's up everyone, welcome back to another Fantasy Puck video. Today I'm going to go over my top 20 defenseman rankings and I'm going to rank them by tier. So keep this in mind, I always want to say this when we're doing tiering videos, is just because a player's in the D tier, that doesn't mean he's a bad player. It's just a D tier amongst the top 20 defensemen in the league. So these are my own personal rankings. I'm currently using Yahoo default scoring and hopefully you can agree with some of them. I know there's going to be some controversial takes. And also, there are going to be defensemen that are missing that could easily fall into the top 20. Jacob Trouba is an example. Crystal Tang as well are two players that actually perform really well in the peripheral categories that I just didn't include in this right now. But they will be honorable mentions near the end of the video. I also want to let everybody know that the Fantasy Puck Patreon leagues have opened up. The link will be in the description below to our website. All the information will be on there. Make sure you're joining our Discord too if you're not in there already. It's a very active hockey community with over 1,300 members. Everyone's talking fantasy hockey. And I know all of you guys have questions. I love when you ask them on the videos. But if you need questions answered immediately, everything's going to be on our Discord. So definitely hop in there. All the links, description below. If you have any questions, leave a comment on this video. And let's jump into it now. Okay, so to no surprise, for me, my first defenseman off the board, I think he could easily be going top 10 every year just because of how good he is offensively. He could be a 100-point player every year. It's going to be Cale Makar. And he has some of the biggest upside of any defenseman since I've started playing fantasy hockey. He could score 30 goals in a season. Wouldn't surprise me at all. We currently have him projected for 23 goals this year. The biggest thing with Makar is injury. If he can stay healthy for a full 82, like we saw with McKinnon last year, he's going to be a beast. That top line, the top power play unit are extremely good. No Valery Nichushkin's gonna hinder the scoring a little bit with the Colorado Avalanche this season, but I don't think it'll hurt Makar at all because he's such a beast offensively. He should be a top power play point producer in the league. Very good shot rate, extremely good goals and assist rate, and he's my #1 defenseman off the board in every league. If you're in a keeper league, I think you can actually argue Makar as a top 5 pick in this season. So my #2 is my boy. I'm sure a lot of you guys thought Quinn Hughes was going to be here, but it's Roman Josi. I think Josi could easily be a top 15 pick in almost every league. For those who owned him last year, you just know how strong he is offensively. They added 2 huge pieces in Jonathan Marchessault and Steven Stamkos. He was a point per game player last year without those 2 guys. Not to mention, he's one of the best peripheral defensemen in the entire league. He flirts with 300 shots. He flirts with 150 blocks. He also hits. He's a power play point machine. He sometimes will finish higher than Makar depending on your scoring in some leagues, and that's why he's an S-tier defenseman. I love such a strong defenseman. I know a lot of you guys agree, but for those who have late first-round picks or even early first-round picks, depending on what we start to see in drafts and once ADP start getting a little bit more flooded when people start doing mock drafts, he is one of the best complementary second-round picks you could take in some leagues, even in the 3rd round. So really high on Roman Josi this season. I'm always high on him. He's just such a safe defenseman. He barely gets injured, so there's a lot to like there. So next, it's going to be Quinn Hughes. He is a borderline S-tier defenseman for me, and people aren't going to like this. But the reason why he's in the S-tier is just because of his point production, but he doesn't have very strong peripherals, and that's my concern with him. Now, he did get over 200 shots last season. He doesn't hit, he doesn't block. He's very reliant on the top power play unit, which was extremely good to start the season last year. But when I went to look at his numbers, his power play points weren't overly inflated last year. And when I talk about Rasmus Dahlin, I want to talk about how he fell off last season and why, and it's the power play point production. So the Quinn Hughes, a very safe defenseman that should get you around 80 points with the opportunity to score 100 like Cale Makar. The only issue is just the overall lack of peripherals because he's not a physical defenseman. He's not a high blocking defenseman. So that's my concern with Quinn Hughes. The floor isn't extremely high, but the ceiling is extremely high just because of that point production. Moving on, we're going to start with the first A-tier defenseman. And he is borderline an S-tier defenseman as well, is Rasmus Dahlin. So what I mentioned with Quinn Hughes is, and typically what you see with players that go off and have extremely good power play point production season is they start to taper off in future seasons where they can't produce that good on the power play. This entire Buffalo Sabres team 2 years ago was extremely good on the power play. but last year they struggled a lot. They could not find their footing on that top power play unit. You saw Dahlin's points dip quite a bit this season, but the good part is, although his points dipped, he's still extremely good peripheral defenseman. He contributes in all 3 categories at a very high level. He's a very good hit producing defenseman that can score 70, 75 points, 15 goals a season. So there's a lot to like from Dahlin. I think he's going to be falling a lot more in drafts than people think. And yes, I would draft him over Evan Bouchard, a guy that's extremely reliant on the top power play unit. So Rasmus Dahlin here is my 4th defenseman off the board. I think he's the 4th best defenseman going into the season. So moving on to the next defenseman is Evan Bouchard. So it's difficult with Bouchard because we really only saw one extremely good season, but he was able to carry that momentum into the playoffs. He's on the best power play in the world with the best power play player in the entire world with Connor McDavid and Leon Draisaitl there. So the production should sustain. He actually seemed to get a lot more confident and better defensively just watching some of those playoff games that Edmonton were in. So I like Bouchard. He does have decent hit volume. He has okay block volume and pretty good shot volume. So he pretty much hits all 4 categories. He's going to be a very good power play point producer for you. He has a ceiling to be a Norris contending defenseman just strictly off of points. But I still think there's risk depending on where you're going to be drafting him because we only saw one really good season from him. Moving on to the next A-tier defenseman, Victor Hedman. So last season, if you watched the channel, you know how high I was on Mikhail Sergachev last year. I did think he was going to take over that power play 1 role because he stole it from Hedman. But now with Sergachev gone, it's Hedman. He's the #1 guy on that top power play. He's the #1 guy on the top power play. He's the #1 defenseman on that team. So he should be in line to play another big 26+ minute season. He should be in line for 70 points this year. You know Kucherov's effectiveness on the top power play unit. Now I'm really curious to see what happens with Stamkos gone, but they get an elite sniper in Jake Gensel, so it shouldn't be that bad. But that power play unit has been together for a very long time, especially the Kucherov, Stamkos, Hedman trio. So it's going to be interesting to see, but I still think he has a really, really solid floor. He's a very, very strong defenseman. Not very strong in the peripheral category, similar to Quinn Hughes, but he does produce pretty good offensively, and that's why he should be in the A tier. Moving on to my next defenseman is going to be Noah Dobson. So Dobson was extremely good to start last season, but he did taper off. The thing I like about Dobson is he's a peripheral beast. He has extremely good shot volume, extremely good block volume, and he has the upside to play on that top power play unit. He mans that entire defensive core, so he should be in line again for a high leveraged role and a high leveraged offensive opportunities. So there's a lot to like from Dobson there. There's not much competition on that back end. That team's power play was inflated last season, and that is a little bit of a concern. But the thing with Dobson that I like is he does have very strong peripherals, and that contributes to all categories, and he should be a very high floor defenseman. Moving on, I'm going to jump down to the B tier now, and it's going to be Moritz Seider. I'm very curious to what everyone thinks about who's going to be the top power play defenseman on the Wings this season. I know they signed David Gustafsson. They got rid of Gostisbehere. So it's either going to be Seider or Gustafsson. So if Seider plays top power play unit, and we're going to find out in training camp, he should be in the A tier because that power play point production is just going to contribute to his point total on top of being a triple 100 player, which means he's 100 shots, 100 blocks, 100 hits. There's not many defensemen you can find that actually put up 50 points and 100 plus of all those stats. So he's a rare type of breed of defenseman. He's very young. I don't like the Wings overall going into the season. I still think they're very aged, and I can't see them being overly competitive. Maybe in the wildcard spot or maybe a little bit below. But still with Seider, you know what you're going to get from him. Extremely good peripherals, big minutes, and hopefully power play 1 opportunity. That's going to be the biggest thing for me with Seider. He's arguably an A-tier defenseman. But for now, because we aren't 100% sure if he's on the top power play unit or not, he's going to be in that B tier for me. Josh Morrissey is the next defenseman for me. So last year he fell off in terms of points just a tad. And this year we're projected him for 62 points. So it's going to be scaled down a little bit more from what you saw over the last 2 seasons. He was extremely good 2 years ago. Everyone was calling him Josh Norrisy. So I'm interested to see how Norrisy will be this year. But again, a good peripheral, strong defenseman. That top power play unit struggled a lot last year, and that did hurt his point total. But hopefully that power play gets a little bit better. If I remember a stat correctly, I know we have some Winnipeg Jets fans in the Discord. So if you're watching, Cadillac, I'm looking at you. if I remember correctly, that top power play unit, all 5 of them actually do not play a single game together. With Velarde, Connor, Ehlers, Scheifele, and Morrissey, if I'm not mistaken, or maybe Perfetti up the middle instead of Ehlers. So if I'm not mistaken, those 5 players actually did not have a single game together because they were injured at different times. Connor was injured last year. Velarde missed a lot of time. So if they can stay healthy this season, he should be in line for a big year. He's my 9th defenseman off the board, so it should be very good value there. It just depends on where he's going in drafts. Next defenseman for me, and I know a lot of you are looking at your screen right now saying, how is Adam Fox a B tier defenseman? Listen, my issue with Fox, he's a very, very good point producing defenseman, but that's pretty much it. So right now we have Adam Fox, and I have it up on my screen here. We have him projected for 149 shots, 30 hits, and 112 blocks. So it's very difficult to get behind defensemen, especially for you that play in hits leagues that will only produce 30 hits going into the season. The only other defenseman in this range that's lower than him is Morgan Riley with 25 projected hits this season. So he will get you 100 blocks, he will get you over 100 shots, and over hopefully 70 points. But my issue is just the peripherals. He's a name that always goes way too early in drafts. You see him going 40, even 30 in drafts, the 3rd, 4th defenseman off the board, and he ends up finishing as defenseman 10 and rank 60, rank 70, and you're wondering, like, how come? It's just because those peripherals lack quite a bit relative to other defensemen, where guys like Moritz Seider, they're not putting up 70 points, but he's also contributing 190 shots, 150 hits, 150 blocks, and that's what really contributes to the point totals in some of your leagues. And especially if you play in Cats leagues, your forwards will do the heavy lifting in terms of the offensive production, goals and assists, and then you rely on your defensemen for those blocks and hits and those peripheral numbers. So next defenseman for me here is going to be Charlie McAvoy. I love him going into every season, and the main reason why is because he always falls in drafts, and I literally do not know why. So last year, he was my most owned defenseman. If you watch that video I posted right before the season started, my most owned players, he was my most owned defenseman across all my leagues. And because defensemen were going super early, and then you're looking in the 6th round after you've scooped up your forwards, those high elite forwards that are falling, and you go in the 6th round, you see there's still a power play 1 defenseman on this Boston Bruins team that's going to be, contending for the top team in the league. And McAvoy is a minute muncher. He plays a ton of minutes going in every single season. So McAvoy, he's a B tier defenseman. He's always an A tier value for me because he just somehow seems to fall in drafts. So a lot to like here from McAvoy going into the season. We project him for 60 points. He's a high block defenseman. He hits. He's in the triple 100 categories while putting up to 60 points this season. So a lot to like from McAvoy. I would consider him an A tier defenseman, but just the other D above him, I like just a tad bit more. Okay, so to round out the B tier defenseman, I'm going to toss in John Carlson. And I might take a little bit of slack here about the John Carlson take. He led all defensemen in minutes played last year. That power play was absolutely atrocious. If I'm not mistaken, it was one of the worst in the league last year. So hopefully this power play gets a little bit better. There is some concern with Jacob Chikrin coming into the team, but he's actually a strong defensive-minded defenseman. So hopefully that doesn't really take away from Carlson. The minutes may go down a little bit for him, but he still will be that power play 1 workhorse defenseman that crushes all peripherals. He's a very good shot volume defenseman. He's a very good hit and block defenseman, while also producing a ton on the power play, a very high floor. He was injured 2 years ago, and last year you got him at a discount. So I'm hoping, again, going into the season, you can get him at a discount. We project him for 58 points this season, 185 shots, 140 blocks, 66 hits, so all the categories, and he should be a very, very good value defenseman off the board. So moving on to the next defenseman is going to be in the C tier. It's going to be Mackenzie Weegar, and Weegar is a peripheral machine, and I know you've heard me say it about 10 times in this video right now, but Mackenzie Weegar is a peripheral machine. We have him projected for 194 hits, 185 blocks, 154 blocks and 185 hits. So he's going to be tapping into all those categories, 150 for all 3, while also putting up 47 points. He had that really big hot streak last year where he was scoring a ton of goals. If I'm not mistaken, he scored 20 goals last season. So should be in line for a pretty good season in terms of peripherals. I don't know what we're going to see with the production offensively because They are going to be a little bit weaker of a team. I don't think they're going to be as strong as they were last year. They also lost Jacob Markstrom, so the team may not be winning most of their games going into the season, but still a very high floor defenseman. You can likely get him at a discount going into the season, and if you're in peripheral leagues, if you owned him last year, you know how good he actually was. Next defenseman for me is Miro Heiskanen. He's an S tier real life defenseman, but he's a C tier of the top 20 fantasy defenseman, and my issue is just the peripherals are lacking quite a bit. He also fits in the category with Rasmus Dahlin, when 2 years ago that Dallas power play was extremely good, and you saw the inflated numbers with Jason Robertson if you had him 2 years ago. You saw the drop off last year. Miro Heiskanen was up for Norris 2 years ago. His point production was the highest of his career, and it dipped a little bit last year. Rupe Hintz, the same thing. So that whole Dallas team really regressed last year in the top power play unit, and my issue is that his point production is somewhat reliant on that top power play point production. So if he doesn't get there on the power play point production, he won't get there in the peripheral categories. So for me, he's going to be in the C tier, but he should be playing a ton of minutes this year. He's probably going to be a top 5 Norris candidate, if not the Norris this season. I love him in real life. I'm a Dallas Stars fan. You can see the jersey above me right here. But still, I'm likely not going to be on him in drafts just because he might be going a little bit earlier than he should be, because he's a good real life defenseman, just like Adam Fox. Next up for me is going to be Mikhail Sergachev. I'm a little iffy on this because I don't know what it's going to be like for him in Utah this year with Sean Durzi there. But for now, I'm going to put him as the C tier because I do think he will take over that #1 role in Utah. With Sergachev here, he's a very good peripheral defenseman. He hits a lot at an elite level in the league. And we did see some of that offensive success in Tampa when he did take over the top power play unit from Hedman, as I mentioned earlier. So if that power play can get hot like this year, like they did last year, it's just a matter of what's going to happen with Sean Durzi. Is he going to be playing top power play unit? Is it going to be Sergachev? So there are some question marks. I think he would be a higher tier defenseman if we knew for a fact he was on power play 1, but for now he's going to be in my C tier. Brock Faber is going to round out my C tier defenseman. And the reason why is because I am bullish on this Minnesota Wild team this season. I'm also bullish on that top power play unit. I think Kaprizov is going to contend for the Hart Trophy this year. My issue with Faber is that he actually has never been a power play defenseman in his career. And I remember when he got moved to the top power play unit, and I listened to an interview with Logan Cooley, who was his teammate in Minnesota and in NCAA, not for the Minnesota Wild, NCAA. And he basically said Faber didn't play on the top power play unit for us. He was more of a shutdown defenseman. So he's new to this role, but he flourished in it. He was one of the best pickups all of last season. Hopefully he can pick off from where he was last year. He finally signed a contract, so Minnesota has him locked up. He's going to be a very strong defenseman this year. I like his peripheral numbers, but for now, he's going to be a C tier defenseman. So now starting off the D tier, I'm going to start with Dougie Hamilton. There is injury concern with Dougie, and there has been for his whole career. So if he can stay healthy, he's easily a B tier defenseman for me, but there's still injury concern. There's also concern that he will not be on the top power play unit. Luke Hughes took over last year and should continue to maintain the top power play unit. So that will hurt Dougie's production. But Dougie is a really odd defenseman where he seems to be the highest shot volume with Roman Josi as well every single season. He'll play 20 minutes and get 5 shots, where Luke Hughes is playing 25 minutes, have a shot on net and a power play point. So if he was top power play unit confirmed, he would definitely be a B tier or an A tier defenseman. There's also a little bit of injury risk with Dougie, but I still think he's going to be a really, really strong choice later in drafts. As maybe your defenseman 2 or defenseman 3, just because of those strong underlying peripherals, but there is risk with injury. Morgan Rielly here is my next D tier defenseman. Same thing. He's projected for just 25 hits this season, 57 blocks. Sorry, that's Quinn Hughes actually. So Quinn Hughes is a defenseman that actually doesn't have very strong peripherals. But Morgan Rielly here, he's a very strong offensive defenseman. But it seems like on that top power play unit, a lot of the work goes to Matthews, Marner, Tavares. So most of the forwards like to handle that top power play unit. But with Rielly here, I still think he's a very good option. There is a little bit of injury risk with him as well. They've added some better defensemen, so hopefully he kind of tones it down a little bit in terms of the minutes, and we maybe will see him in the 22 to 23 range. But still with Riley, he's going to be a good value pick for drafts. It's just some of those peripherals lack a little bit. He just broke 100 blocks in our projections. He's under 100 hits, and he's under 180 shots. But still should be a pretty solid player this season. Going to be good value in drafts. Leafs players always go earlier than they should, though. Erik Karlsson's my next D-tier defenseman. I have no idea what to expect from the Pittsburgh Penguins this year. They just lost a 40 goal scorer in Jake Gensel. Their power play was extremely bad last season. I really have no clue what this Penguins outlook's going to be other than Crosby's season. So it's going to be interesting to see. There may be some good value picks there. But with Karlsson, I don't think we're going to see the production we saw 2 years ago. Last year's production really fell off in Pittsburgh. So it's going to be interesting to see what happens with this Pittsburgh Penguins team. But for me, I'm probably not even going to be taking Karlsson in drafts. Now, lastly, we have Jake Sanderson. He's a guy that I love here at Fantasy Puck, one of my favorite defensemen in the league. I think he has the upside to be a Norris contending defenseman at some point in his career. But this year, again, the Senators are just as big of a question mark as the Pittsburgh Penguins will be. I have no idea what to expect from them. But with Jacob Chikrin gone, it now opens the door for Sanderson to hopefully play a bunch of minutes this season, man that top power play unit. Shabbat is a really big injury risk as well. So it's going to be all hands on deck for Sanderson this year. He's probably going to be A-tier value because he didn't really produce like we thought he would last season. So he should be producing some good value. I know a lot of the people in the Discord are on him this year, so it's going to be exciting to see. But for me, he's the final defenseman to round up my top 20. So I hope you enjoyed the video, guys. Make sure you leave a like before you leave. Subscribe if you're new to the channel. And let me know where I got the tiers wrong, and we'll discuss in the comments below. I love hearing everybody's take. And before you leave, hop on over to our website. Check out the Fantasy Puck Patreon link if you're interested in competing in fun and competitive leagues that are extremely active. And if you want access to all of our tools, head on over to our Patreon. You'll find everything there to set you up for the drafts. I have my projections here on the right, which are exclusive to Patreon members. So if you want access to that and set yourself up for a very strong draft and season, that will all be accessible through our Patreon. So thanks for watching, everybody, and take care.